this week is the Parsha, the portion of Vayeitzei, which describes the journey of Yaakov, of Jacob, from his homeland of Beersheba in Israel to a place called Haran. This is the aftermath of the incident where Jacob appropriated the blessings that Yitzchak, his father, was intending to give to Esau, who we thought was the older brother, by virtually being biologically the firstborn, but also having the privilege of being the firstborn who carries on the legacy, so he wanted him to have the special blessings. Yaakov, who purchased the birthright, however, was told by his mother to go and pose as if he was Esau, his brother, and he got the blessings instead. Esau, we're told in the end of last week's portion, was extremely upset, to put it mildly, and it was told to Rivka that her son Esau wanted to kill Yaakov. So she comes to her husband Yitzchak and tells him that she doesn't want Yaakov to marry any of the local girls. She would be terribly upset if that would happen, but instead she wanted him to go travel to her brother Lavan in Haran and marry someone from that family. And Yitzchak, in fact, calls in Yaakov and tells him precisely that he should go get a wife in Haran. Rivka does not mention to her husband that she knew that Esau wanted to kill Yaakov, presumably because she didn't want him to be so troubled that the son that he so cherished and loved sorry about that. The son that he cherished and loved was a murderer, or potential murderer. So now Yaakov leaves, and the Torah begins by saying, and Yaakov leaves Beersheba, and he goes to Haran. So the question is, why does the Torah have to write both things? And Yaakov left Beersheba and he went to Haran. It could have just said, and Yaakov went to Haran. We know that he lived in Beersheba. So obviously if he went to Haran, he had to leave Beersheba. So there are many explanations, but one explanation is that there were two reasons he had left. One reason was he wanted to get away from Beersheba, because that's where his brother Esau was. And the other reason is he wanted to go to Haran to get married. And this sheds a little bit more light on why the emphasis was placed on finding a wife. Because whenever we have a situation in life where things are not good and we want to get away from those situations, it's very important that in fleeing negative experiences and situations, you do not just look at it as running away from something negative. You try to project that the place where you're going is a positive place. And the real reason you're going, while it may seem that it is because you're escaping something, it's really because you're attracted to something positive. You always give a positive spin on any type of move that you make, even if the original reason for it was to run away from the negative. So the Torah says Yaakov left Beersheba, but he went to Haran. He put his focus on going to Haran, a place where he would find his mate, which would then establish the entire Jewish people. Now, there's a spiritual understanding of this story. Yaakov represents the soul that we all possess. Where is the soul before we're born? The soul is in the heavenly spheres. The soul is in connection, is connected to God, basking in divine light, in a most blissful experience that can't be imagined by us mortals, but that's where the soul is. So then why does the soul come down into this world? And this is the story of the soul. Vayeitzei Yaakov, the soul leaves Beersheba, this well of seven, the city which represents the source where the soul thrives spiritually, and it goes down to Haran. The word Haran in Hebrew is related to a word which means wrath, a place in which there is a lot of anger, a lot of hostility, a lot of negativity. So why? Why does God force the soul down into this world? And the answer is, by being in this world, the soul ultimately, by meeting all the challenges, Jacob falls asleep, it's dark. And in spite of this darkness, what does he do? He has this dream where he sees this ladder going from the earth to the heavens. By virtue of us being in this very lowly existence, relative to where the soul was before he came out to this world, the soul is then elevated to a higher place beyond which it came, from which it came. In another commentary, I just found this today of a contemporary writer, and he says that an interesting thing. It says that Jacob took the stones of Hamakom, of this place, and he put it around his head, and that's where he slept. The word makom, place, is also a term that is used to describe God. God forbid someone loses a close relative, and the mourners are comforted by the visitors. It's traditional to say the words Hamakom Yenachem Esther, may the makom, the God occupies space. The word makom means space, a location. May he comfort you. We refer to God as Hamakom, the place, the space, because God fills all the space. He's omnipresent. And here, the word makom could also be understood as a reference to God who fills all the space. That even though Jacob was now going into exile, and what he wanted more than anything else was to eventually get back to his father's house, to get out of exile, his focus was Hamakom, on God who fills all the space. It's also interesting that if you take the word makom, and in Hebrew every word is also a number, and you multiply the name of God, which is Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, and you multiply each letter by itself. Yud is 10, so 10 times 10 is 100. Hey is 5, 5 times 5 is 25. If you do this to the 4 letters, it adds up to 186, which is the numerical value of makom. Another very fascinating gematria that this work mentions is that if you take the word makom and you spell it phonetically, in Hebrew, the letter mem could be spelled mem. And the letter kuf is spelled kuf vav fei. If you take all of these letters of makom and you spell them phonetically, and then you add up, they all add up to Mashiach. That means that what should our focus be? What should we be dreaming about as Jacob was dreaming? And he sees this ladder going from the earth to the heavens, and the ladder, the Zohar says, is a ladder of prayer, where we ask God for our needs and we have our requests expressed. What should they be about? They should be about makom, about God who is in exile, and that we need Mashiach to redeem us so that God's presence should be revealed instead of the way it's concealed in exile. Now, Yaakov left Beersheba, Israel, Holy Land, to go to Haran. Usually, when the Torah talks about someone leaving Israel to go to the diaspora, it uses the term Vayered, and he descended, because Israel, whether not just geographically, but spiritually, is on a higher plane than any other place in the world. So that leaving Israel is considered to be a decline, going downhill. Here it doesn't say that. Why? So Rabbi Vayeitzei explained that when Jacob left, he took Israel with him. This is one of the sources, perhaps, for a statement that the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, as he is known, said to a Jew who wanted to go to Israel. And he said, your mission is to make Israel here. When we create a spiritual and holy atmosphere, we take the spirit of Israel and we bring it into the diaspora. And that's what Jacob did. he brought Israel into Haran. And it's an interesting thing about this parsha. It's one of the few parshas, few sections of the Torah where there are no paragraphs. It's just one long paragraph, no spaces in between, which means that he never lost sight of where he came from. He never stopped. Usually a person comes from a place, he leaves home, the first few weeks, months, maybe years, he's still thinking about his home, and then he adjusts to the new place and he no longer thinks back, looks back at the past. He's focused on the future, which is great. But no, Yaakov, as much as he's focused on the future, never forgets where he came from. He's always bringing his hometown, his parents, patriarchs Yitzchak and Rivka, the holiness of the land of Israel, he's bringing it with him, and it never ceased to be part of his experience in his life. So Jacob falls asleep in this place, and he sees this ladder going up to the heavens and the angels going up and down, and he wakes up and so this is a holy place. This is the gate to heaven. This happened to be the site upon which the temple would eventually be built. And Jacob wakes up in the morning, realizes this is the place that he had been sleeping, and he makes a pledge to God that if God will protect him, God will be his God. This stone that he made as a monument will become a house of God, and everything you give me, I will tithe. I will give a tenth. So this is one of the sources of the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, of giving charity, which according to Jewish law requires giving at least 10% of your net income. It means after taxes, whatever you make, if you have $100,000, you give minimum $10,000 to charity. But here it uses a double expression. In Hebrew, if you translate it literally, he's saying, I'm tithing, I am tithing, double tenth. That means that ideally one should give 20%, 1/5 of one's income to charity. And this is the source of it. There are many authorities who say that even though law says don't give up to a fifth, person who is imbued with more passion is allowed to give even more than a fifth. Those are two different standards of tzedakah. And we know that the Talmud says that what hastens the redemption, it is the giving of tzedakah, the giving of charity. But the redemption can come in two scenarios. It can come in a very poor scenario. It says Mashiach is riding on a donkey, a poor man on a donkey, in a very natural, limited way. It'll be much better than anything is today, but it'll be limited. It'll be like a political transformation that the world will no longer know of any tyranny and so on and so forth. It'll be a great world, peaceful world, but it will not be a miraculous deliverance. But then there's another possibility that Mashiach will come on a cloud, which is a metaphor for coming in a very majestic way. Things will be transformed in a very positive way. It'll be miraculous, and so on and so forth. One could suggest that since the tzedakah is what hastens the redemption, when people give the minimum amount, even the ideal amount, that will hasten the redemption, but it may only be in a very limited way. But if we give beyond the limits, then God will give us a beyond the limits type of redemption. Then it says, Yaakov, after he got this promise from God that he's going to protect him, and says Yaakov lifted his feet, or as they translate it in this text, light of foot. Jacob set out for the land of the people of the east. What does it mean, he light of foot? So Rashi says that when he heard the good news, it got easier for him to travel. But there's another interpretation, a Hasidic interpretation, that the head and the feet are metaphors for the first beginning of the Jewish people is the head. The last leg, as it were, of our journey towards the redemption, final redemption through Mashiach, we are called the legs. We are that final period of history. And Jacob, thousands of years ago, 3,500 plus years ago, lifted up the legs. We get our inspiration, we get our power to break through all the barriers, because the word Yaakov is connected to a word yubaka, to break through, to pierce through, to penetrate. He gave us the power to penetrate the darkness of exile. And in fact, that dream that he had with the ladder going from the ground to the heavens, a ladder usually has rungs. And according to the Midrash, its 4 rungs represent the 4 different exiles the Jewish people had to go through. The first exile was the Babylonian exile, then you had the Persian exile, then you had the Greek exile, then the Roman exile, which lasts until Mashiach comes. And Jacob's dream was a prophetic vision that we will overcome and outlive and survive all of these 4 exiles, and we will be ultimately redeemed. So it's Jacob's prayer, Jacob's dream, that gives us the power to continue and get out of exile. Then Yaakov comes to his uncle Lavan, and he works for marrying Rachel, works 7 years to marry her. And it says those 7 years were like a few days because of his love for her, which is strange, because usually when a person is in love with someone and they're told they will not be able to marry that person for 7 years, every day is like an eternity. You're impatient. You can't wait. And yet here it says they were like a few days. It was nothing. It was a very pleasant, pleasurable experience. Well, one way of understanding it is that to him, marriage of Rachel was not, God forbid, just a physical love and attraction. It was a very deep spiritual bond that he had with Rachel. And his marriage to her would be the ultimate mitzvah, the ultimate spiritual experience. And we know that in Judaism, whenever we have a mitzvah, the mitzvah may take 2 minutes, but the preparation for it will take much longer. Because the preparation is what makes the mitzvah penetrate into our consciousness and become part of us. So that in that sense, the preparation for the mitzvah is an integral part of the mitzvah. And when you're performing the mitzvah, you are in a state of joy. So all the 7 years that he was waiting, he was in effect experiencing the spiritual bliss of being married to Rachel, but just in the preparation, in the preparatory stage, which means that he is very much enthralled and excited and enthusiastic about every day that he was waiting. So it was like a few days because it was so blissful and enjoyable. Yaakov is then tricked by his uncle Lavan, and instead of Rachel, he gives him Leah. And when he complains about it, Lavan self-righteously exclaims that we don't do this here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older daughter, but if you want Rachel as well, work another 7 years, which means that he would marry her in a week, but 7 years after, he would still have to work to pay for his wife, Rachel. Why did he have him wait a week? So the Talmud says, because ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. You don't intermingle 2 celebrations. You don't have 2 weddings at the same time. And since a wedding is followed by 7 days of celebration, you can't have 2 weddings occur within the 7 days in one family. So you wait a week. And that's one of Jewish laws. And the Rabbi asks a question, there's a principle in the Talmud that we do not derive laws from the way people behaved before the Torah was given at Mount Sinai. Yes, they did certain things before Sinai, but unless it was mentioned in the Torah as a commandment after Sinai, it's not considered to be binding on us because maybe that was a one-time thing. It was not something for the future. So then how do we derive this law that you're supposed to wait a week to have the second marriage? If you have 2 sisters getting married, you wait a week or more between the 2 marriages. And the Rebbe's answer is that we cannot derive laws from the behavior of people before the Torah was given, but we could derive personality experiences. What is the reason why we can't have 2 weddings at the same time? Because the joy of one will detract from the other. It's hard to put all of your efforts and energy into one celebration when you're then distracted by the other celebration. So both celebrations will ultimately suffer. This is not a law. This is a reality of human nature. And the lesson from here is that when a person is involved in a mitzvah, especially if the mitzvah is to bring joy to someone, you should be totally focused on that mitzvah. Your whole mind, your whole heart, your whole being should be in that mitzvah. That's one of the teachings of Hasidus. There's a story told of the Rebbe Rashab. He was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was going to deliver his major discourse that all the students there were waiting to hear. But before the discourse, there's a melody, a Hasidic melody that is sung to get people into the mood, prepare them spiritually for the very profound mystical discourse. As they were singing, the Rebbe Rashab noticed that they were eager to finish the song to hear the discourse. So he interrupted them, and he started to discuss the idea of you have to be a pnimi, that a person has to be totally absorbed in what they're doing. And even though what you're doing is a preparation for the next thing, you're not focused on the next thing, you're focused on the preparation. You have to be totally there. This is a Jewish concept. I know in modern times we have different names for this situation where your mind is completely focused on what you're doing. You're present, but this is a concept that is parcel of Judaism and has always been. And it's based, you could say, on this law that you don't intermingle two celebrations because you have to be totally focused on each one. Then he marries now Rachel. He's married to two, Leah and Rachel. And Leah has children and Rachel does not. And Rachel complains to Yaakov. And she tells him, well, give me children. Pray for me. If not, I'm like dead. And Yaakov gets upset. Rachel. He says, am I in God's place? Did I withhold children from you? What was Yaakov getting upset? His poor wife, whom he loved so much, was in such distress because she was barren, she was childless, and her co-wife, Leah, had so many children. She was miserable, so why did he get upset at her? One of the commentaries explains that God, also, why doesn't he pray for her? She's obviously asking him to pray to God, so why doesn't he pray for her? And Rashi says, because he says, I have children, so I don't need to pray, but why wouldn't he pray for his wife that he loves so much? And one of the answers is that there's a principle that God loves the prayer of righteous people. Righteous people don't like to pray for their own personal needs. They always like to pray for other people's needs. They are totally satisfied with whatever God doles out to them. There's one exception. They want children. Because children is not about you, it's about carrying on the legacy of God's teachings to the next generation, perpetuating your relationship with God. So what does God do? He wants to hear the prayer of righteous people. He loves to hear the prayer. It's music to his ears, as it were. So God withholds children from very righteous people, so they should pray. So Rachel is saying to her husband, Yaakov, you're the great tzaddik, you're such a righteous man, why don't you pray for me? And he's telling her, you're making a mistake. God doesn't want to hear my prayer. You're much superior to me. Your prayer will have so much more meaning. You should do the prayer. So by getting upset at her, it forced her to acknowledge that she doesn't have any chance of getting outside help. She has to do it herself. And that's exactly what caused her to eventually bear a child. Or two children. Leah, by the way, has son Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. The three first sons she names by those names because of the connotation of those names is that God has seen her suffering, has heard her suffering, that God is now giving her an opportunity to get closer to her husband. The fourth son she names Yehuda because she says, now I will thank God. Why is she thanking God now and not before? Obviously, you have a child, the first child, you would thank God. And yet she says, she calls him Reuven because God saw my suffering. That's what the word Reuven could mean. seeing the suffering. Why is she focused on her suffering? Why doesn't she thank God? And the answer is, of course she thanked God. But her thankfulness to God was still on a level where she was still focused on what she was benefiting. When she comes to the fourth son, Yehuda, by the way, Yehuda is the name which became the name of the Jewish people. Yehudi, Jew, comes from Yehuda. Yehuda is the one, she said, now I reached the level of gratitude to God that I don't even think about my own benefit. I'm totally subordinating myself to God. There's a process in gratitude. In American public is going to be celebrating Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, many people say, I'm thankful for this or for that. That's not what it's about. If you're not thankful to God, then gratitude means nothing. The whole idea of gratitude is that you're giving recognition to the other, in this case, to God. But if you say, I'm grateful for my good health or for my prosperity, you're focused on your own benefits without directing it to another, to God or another person for that matter, whom you have to thank. That's not gratitude. Gratitude is where you direct it to God. And if people are just using shorthand and they really mean God, it doesn't make sense to leave out the main thing. Number two, the young generation doesn't know your intention and thinks it's just enough to show that you're happy, that you're blessed. But it's good to be happy, but you can't confuse that with gratitude. Leah at every point certainly recognized God, but as she kept on benefiting from God's blessings, she realizes more and more that it's not about her, it's about God. And that's Yehuda, who's the ancestor of King David and the ancestor of Mashiach. Mashiach is the one who's going to reveal this ultimate level of gratitude. And that's why he is a descendant of Yehuda. And then one final thing, Rachel finally has a child, and she calls him Joseph, because she said, may God add another son for me. Isn't that strange? She's talking about her son, her first child, after so many years, and then she's greedy. She's saying, I want another. As I said before, focus on what you have now. Why is she talking about another son? And one of the Hasidic explanations is that she's saying what my son is all about, what makes him special, is that he can take an outsider, and turn him into a son. Yosef means to add, to increase, while the other children are able to relate to people who are similar to them. This Yosef will be capable of taking an acher, an outsider, and turn him into a ben, to a son, to an insider. That's the increase that he could do. And that indeed is, Joseph was the viceroy of Egypt. He was able to even deal with Egyptians who were on a much lower level, who were truly outsiders. And that's the legacy of Yosef to this very day. Have a good evening, and a good Shabbos, a good week.